Xanthe fever is known to infect betazoids of their age.
Xanthe fever? Oh, that's ridiculous. That's impossible. That only affects older betazoids.
It causes empathetic abilities to unintentionally broadcast, heightening the emotions of those around them.
Welcome, friends. We're here discussing Star Trek Lower Decks once again this week, Season 4, Episode 5, Empathalogical Fallacies. Now, spoilers do lie ahead, so duck out now if those aren't your thing. On with the show. So as I said, this is the 5th episode, and the last 2 episodes have heavily featured some character development, backstory, growth for one of our main Lower Decks characters. This episode is just the same. We focus on T'Lyn, hashtag T'Lynsanity, and it is mostly her character development episode. I do like how they're both integrating this new character quite well into the show, and they're seemingly growing up and maturing with the show itself. It's not the zany slapstick Easter egg-a-thon it was when it first started. It's definitely maturing into something a bit better, and I like how they're kind of adding this element after our characters have been promoted to allow for their growth into something bigger and better. Sure, we haven't had a Boimler or Rutherford-centered episode this season yet, but I have to imagine that's coming somewhere down the pike. There are also a couple of other interesting choices here. There was no cold open, there was nothing prior to the title sequence, we just had those intro titles and then cracked right into the episode, and for the first time, that mystery ship that's going around destroying other ships and or capturing the crew, still yet to be proven what's going on there, it was actually tied into the main plot here. Sure, it wasn't actually directly the main focus, but it was the reason for most of the things going on. It was mentioned at the beginning and the end, and it was the actual reason our 3 Betazoid characters who kind of take front stage in this episode were even here to begin with. But before I get into that, I do want to mention the fact that yes, there was an ancillary mention to the ship in last episode, but it wasn't part of the actual story. Here it was actually tying it in. And it was nice to see these Betazoid characters kind of, I guess you could say, subverting expectations, even though I really hate that phrase, because we thought that they were playing these vapid socialite type party girls, and that was what they were playing. However, they were actually playing it. They were undercover from Betazoid intelligence. And then we had another subversion later on where we find out they weren't actually the ones causing the situation. So I did like that kind of, I don't even know if I want to call it a mystery element of the episode, but the little misdirection, because they kind of seemingly thought that us as the well-discerning Star Trek audience would look into it and see it one way, and then they kind of flipped it on its head. So there were a lot of references to past Star Trek things. The whole Naked Now, Naked Time, all of the weird Star Trek episodes where the crew's inhibitions are affected, their mental capacities are affected. This was a reference to the Lwaxana Troi DS9 episode. I believe it was called Fascination, and it was actually directly referencing that disease in this episode that she had there.
What are you looking at me for?
So when all of the crew starts coming under the influence of something, they kind of seemingly go to the doctor and think that's going to be the cause of it. They all scan negative, but what it ends up turning out to be later on in the episode is related to our main Vulcan character, T'Lyn. She is actually undergoing this emotional crisis, this emotional turmoil, and I say that lovingly because as a Vulcan, it's really all kind of minor seeming. She wants to send a message. She's unable to actually send the message because of a frequency blackout due to the visiting dignitaries. So she kind of has this moment, and it's very subtle. It actually is something that I relate to quite a bit.
It would be illogical to attempt to send this message again.
So that's something I do all the time. If my internet isn't working and I know it's not working, it's like, after 2 minutes, well, let me just try again. The whole point of this background plot of the crew losing their inhibitions and being affected, I thought I was going to hate, and I didn't necessarily think that was the most enjoyable part of the episode, but it was mostly played up as the backdrop. This stuff was happening while we were spending time with our characters getting to know them. One other thing I like to mention here is that they were coming from Angel 1, heading toward Risa, 2 very interesting planets from TNG introduction. I especially like the mention of Angel 1, so enjoy this scene of Riker.
Inform them that you will remain here with me.
They also mentioned that they love the carpeting on Starfleet ships, so please, if we get Legacy, can we add more carpeting back to the ships? That's something that's been drastically missing from the current age of Star Trek vessels, or Starfleet vessels, I should say. So please add the carpeting back. It just makes it feel more homely, and maybe raise the lights a little bit too. So I do like all of those connections, and the fact that they referenced the Fascination episode of DS9. They also referenced the Sarek episode of TNG, where he came down with Bendii syndrome.
Bendii syndrome is more a folktale than a disease. There hasn't been a true case of it in my husband's lifetime.
Because that actually turns out to be what T'Lyn has. Although it's kind of played a little bit differently here than it was in Sarek. It's not an actual disease. It seems to be a manifestation of emotions getting out of control. They said maybe it's a quarter-life crisis or something. It does seem to be less of a physical disease like a virus or anything like that, and it's more of a mental breakdown, but I mean in the way of uncontrolled emotions, not necessarily like a mental breakdown you would think of. Does that make sense? It kind of makes sense in my head, but I don't think I'm describing it very well. So I like the fact that they kind of played these two things together, but they also brought in these little subtle, I don't even want to say Easter eggs because they were part of the actual plot, but the Boimler sub-story where he kind of goes and hangs out with the security people and tries to figure out what they're doing, and they're not really doing security stuff until the very end when they actually do need to come into the plot and get the ship back from the Betazoid women. But they're just hanging out, they're playing games, and I really like this scene here.
Read alert. Read alert. Read alert.
Shut off that damn noise! Shut it off!
They reference Reed on the puzzle, and I really like the fact that they referenced Reed because there's a very famous Reed alert scene from an episode of Enterprise that was called Singularity, where the crew has these effects that are affecting their minds and they're acting out of character, blah, 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 blah. So I don't know if that was an intentional choice, but it seems like some of the inclusions in this episode were all tying back to that theme where our characters have been mentally incapacitated, mentally affected, mentally altered, and I just thought that was a little nice touch to kind of bring these disparate elements together in the episode. I touched on it a little bit earlier. These Betazoid women are working for Betazoid intelligence. They were actually playing the role of these vapid party girls. Now, I would have liked a little bit more, and this is something I kind of was talking to another channel on here, Hailing Frequencies, about a little bit. Go check them out. But I was kind of hoping we would have more of a reference to the Betazoid occupation by the Dominion.
We just received a Priority 1 communication from Starfleet Command. The Dominion has invaded Betazoid.
We really have not referenced or touched upon whatsoever. To have these characters maybe have been radicalized during the Dominion War, and that's part of the reason they're acting a little bit strange, or to just do something with that at all. I know there was material like comics and books that have explored it a little bit, but in Alpha Canon, on screen, we've had no real lasting implications of that, and I think it's definitely something that could be played up very well, especially in Lower Decks. Now, we could also get an exploration of that in a Star Trek Legacy show, assuming that gets greenlit, but this could be a fun way to do it without taking it too heavily, and this is a time frame much closer to those circumstances as opposed to, 30 years removed like a Legacy show probably would be. There was a lot to like in this episode. I wouldn't call it my favorite Lower Decks episode ever, but I do like the momentum we're building towards that mystery, and I like how we're spending time with each and every one of our Lower Decks characters, or seemingly so, and we're getting to know their backstory, we're getting to know more about them. They're getting some character depth and growth. Now, and I do need to say this, and I hope I'm not putting any negative juju into the universe, but because T'Lyn is becoming such a quick fan favorite character, I do worry about her fate, because if you look at the track record of modern Star Trek, specifically spoilers for Strange New Worlds and Picard here, a lot of the most well-liked characters that are introduced, specifically Hemmer and Shaw, they don't make it out of the season they're introduced in. So I do worry a little bit about T'Lyn. I hope she's not heading for the chopping block, but fingers crossed, knock on wood, all that stuff. I really, really like how they're developing these characters and slow burning, but still building a little bit on that mystery element. I really do hope it has a payoff. This being Lower Decks, they could subvert my expectations again, and the whole resolution at the end is just one big joke. I hope that's not the case, and I really do hope they're building to something. Again, there was a couple of really, really fun references in this episode. I would like to address the episode title for next week. If you don't want spoilers on that, check out now. But it's called Parth Ferengi's Heart Place. I didn't mention this in my episode title breakdown. It's absolutely a play on the show Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. My thoughts and my hope for this isn't any real direct connection to the storyline of that show because it's bonkers and it's weird. But I really, really hope, as you saw in the trailer, they kind of visit this Ferengi outpost that looks to be some sort of wedding chapel or something. I really hope the connection is the voice cast from Garth Marenghi's Dark Place plays a lot of the Ferengi in this episode. I know that's just kind of a weird thought in my dream casting, but I really hope that comes true. Overall, I think I did enjoy this episode. It's not my favorite of all time, but it's spending a lot of time doing the things that need to be done by developing our characters and slow burning that storyline, and it's doing so with a backdrop that's, yes, maybe a little amped up from a normal, typical Star Trek episode, but it definitely feels like it has the core of a Star Trek episode or a Star Trek plot, and even though sometimes the B-plots aren't necessarily all that good or well integrated, I think they're probably necessary to keep that balance on the show for some of the people that are here specifically for the zaniness. But what did you think of this episode? What do you think of this season? Leave all your thoughts below. Like, share, subscribe, do all those fancy YouTube things. But until next time...
Okay, enough. Yeah, they didn't enter the neutral zone. What did you expect? Set a course for Sector 87. We'll lurk over there.